Welcome to The Source, where we combine the headlines with in-depth conversations with the newsmakers themselves. Today on the program, fishermen appeal to the government after members of the Chinese Coast Guard take their catch.
Wala naman kami magagawa kasi kumbaga sa nakikisama lang muna kami dyan ngayon dahil andyan yung mga barko nilang malalaki.
Malacanang responds and asks China to act.
We're not taking this sitting down.
The Chinese government vows to discipline its men.
If there is any misconduct conducted by the Chinese Coast Guards, those individuals will be punished.
But Beijing's presence is still strong in disputed waters. And also, did the Philippines lose control of Sandy Cay to China? Acting Chief Justice Antonio Carpio joins us live. Thank you for joining us. I'm Pinky Webb. The government maintains its position to keep friendly relations with China. This after reports of alleged harassment of some members of the Chinese Coast Guard against Filipino fishermen in Scarborough Shoal. Malacanang vows to investigate the incident while China assures the public that they will discipline their men. Let's go straight to the source of the story, Supreme Court. Acting Chief Justice Antonio Carpio. Sir, welcome again to the program.
Good morning, Pinky. Good morning to our viewers.
So good to have you again, sir. Sir, so many things to talk about, and I hope you can help us understand the situation better, because we know that you know this very well. You had a primer on this. Let me start with this. The Filipino fishermen, this was brought to fore. It was a GMA report, sir, that they were. Government doesn't want to call it harassed. The fishermen do not want to call it harassed, but the Chinese Coast Guard were taking their fish from them. Was this a surprise to you, or is this something that you've heard so many times in the past?
Well, we've heard that before. That has been happening for some time now. That they were being, well, if you don't want to call them to call that harassment, that their fish catch were being taken by the Chinese Coast Guard people.
How would you describe it, though?
Well, for me, it's harassment, and it's even theft because they're taking it against the will of the Filipino fishermen. Mm-hmm. We should protest at the very least.
What happened? So, sir, if China, the ambassador of China, says that we will discipline our men once found if any wrongdoing, would that suffice? Would that be enough?
Well, the tribunal said in its ruling that Scarborough Shoal is a common fishing ground of Filipino, Chinese, and Vietnamese fishermen. So we have a right to fish. The Chinese have a right to fish, the Vietnamese. So the one thing that's lacking is that there's no common agreement among these three nations. They should sit down and discuss the rules of fishing within that shoal, because we have to preserve the fish stock so that there will be sustainable fishing. But the Chinese don't want to discuss that with us. But they're saying out of their goodwill, out of the goodness of their heart, they're allowing us to fish there. But that's not what the ruling says. We have a right. That's our traditional fishing ground since time immemorial.
So I want to go back to that because so many things to talk about that. So I was thinking of so many things while you were talking, Chief Justice, Acting Chief Justice. First is, it was a goodwill gesture. So my question is, why does it have to be a goodwill gesture if, let's clear this up, the tribunal said it's not ours, it didn't say it's China's, it didn't say it's Vietnam's, it's saying that the fishermen of China, Filipinos, and Vietnam can fish in Scarborough Shoal.
Yeah, because
so why is it a goodwill gesture?
That's the point of view of China, because China doesn't want to recognize the ruling. The tribunal cannot decide the ownership of Scarborough Shoal because it's a territorial issue. The tribunal can decide only maritime issues, including fishing. So the tribunal said the people from these three countries can fish. But China said, well, in part, partially complying with the ruling, China said, yes, you can fish out of the goodness of our heart, because they don't want to accept the ruling.
Okay, so that's clear to us that they don't care about the ruling. that we are allowing the Filipino people to fish there out of goodwill.
What we should do is we are fishing because that is our traditional fishing ground since the tribunal already ruled on that. We should also maintain our position because otherwise China will later on say, oh, you've been fishing there and you've accepted that you're fishing there because we have allowed you out of the goodness of our heart.
Right. So what you're saying is it should come to a point, sir, that Vietnam, the Philippines, and China should have a common agreement on this.
Yes, how to fish. They will have to decide the quantity of fish that they can take because of course, they cannot take everything because we have to have sustainable fishing there.
Right. But if China says it's theirs and they don't want to honor the tribunal ruling, how can we have an agreement with them?
Well, we will use pressure from ASEAN because Vietnam is also a member of ASEAN, and pressure from the world because China has to abide by international law, with international law. And I've already said before that we should have, right after the ruling was issued, we should have gone to the General Assembly, sponsor a resolution that China must comply with the ruling. I think we will get a majority of the members of the UN to support that. And we do that every year. And I think we will get more support every year. But
we haven't done that.
we haven't done that because the Duterte administration has decided to borrow money from China.
So that's where I want to go to. Sir, how do you really strike a balance between the disputed waters and money, investment, and economic gains coming from China?
Well, first of all, the EEZ of the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea is a very huge area that's larger than our total land area. So you can just imagine the value of the resources in that area. You have oil, fish, gas, and other mineral resources. 24 billion loans from China is a pittance compared to the value of the resources in the West Philippine Sea. There's no comparison at all. And besides, you cannot put the value to sovereign rights or sovereignty. Because if you lose sovereign rights or sovereignty, you lose it forever. You cannot get it back.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to, just very quickly, because we were talking about the fishermen to begin with as a jump-off point of this discussion. I just want to go back to what some of the fishermen said during that press conference together with presidential spokesperson Harry Roque. Let's listen.
Mapilit silang kukuha ng isda kasi hindi naman kami totoo magkaintindihan. Yung ano lang doon, fish. Yun lang. Tapos aakyat na sila sa amin. Titingnan na nila yung mga lagayan namin. Yun na, pipiliin nila yung magagandang isda. Wala naman kami magagawa kasi kumbaga sa nakikisama lang muna kami dyan ngayon dahil andyan yung mga barko nilang malalaki.
I think that it's really telling to hear that nakikisama lang kami kasi nandyan yung mga barko nilang malalaki. Matagal na yung barko nilang malalaki na nandun, sir.
Yeah, in other words, they're really afraid if they don't allow the Coast Guard of China to take their fish. They're afraid of what will happen.
And plain and simple, sir, you call that harassment.
Harassment, that's theft for me.
It's harassment and theft. And then let's go now to the statement made by the Chinese ambassador regarding the issue.
We will check, and if there is any misconduct conducted by the Chinese Coast Guards, those individuals will be punished, and the rules will be there. Even the best regulated families, accidents happen. So we always have bad apples, but if we have bad apples, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to throw them into the South China Sea and feed the fish.
I just want you to react to the statement of the Chinese ambassador. Is that enough?
Well, they have promised to discipline their personnel, and they promise it will not happen again. That's a good start. But we should be careful that their premise is they're doing this out of goodwill. We cannot accept that because we have a legal right to be there. Whether they have goodwill or not is immaterial because the tribunal said that is our common fishing ground.
Yeah, really, that's the track you're taking, Acting Chief Justice, because you're saying that let's not accept that it's a goodwill gesture because we are supposed to be not allowed, we have the right to fish there. It's not the question of being allowed or not.
Yeah, because I'm worried if we accept their narrative that is their goodwill, we'll be giving up our legal right that
Yeah.
we have a right to be there, whether they like it or not.
Yeah. So just to clear that up, the ruling on this, we're talking still about, because there are still other areas to talk about, such as the Spratlys, Sandy Cay. This is the ruling on, of course, July 12, 2016 on Scarborough Shoal. So just to clear this up, the tribunal also considers it imperative to emphasize that the following discussion of fishing rights at Scarborough Shoal is not predicated on any assumption that one party or the other is sovereign over the feature, nor is there any need for such assumption. Ibig sabihin, sir, there's no one country who has the power or siguro the sovereignty to rule over this area.
Well, what the tribunal was saying is that we are not ruling as to who owns the shoal, because that's a territorial dispute,
Yeah.
and we don't have jurisdiction over territorial disputes. But we have jurisdiction over maritime disputes, which include fishing rights.
Right. Do you think a common agreement is possible, sir?
Well, with Vietnam, they're, I think, ready to sign a common agreement with us. The only problem is China. So I think we could start with a common agreement with Vietnam and ask China to join later if China doesn't want to join right away.
At least something. Dalawa na
Yes,
po tayo.
dalawa na.
Doon sa tatlo.
Yes.
So, government should jumpstart this.
Yes, because in that way, the Vietnam and the Philippines are actually reinforcing the ruling by state practice, because they're applying the ruling now. We are enforcing the ruling actually partially because we have agreed to implement it.
You know, sir, the fishermen during that press conference were saying, tinanong po sila kung sino ang may control sa Scarborough Shoal. The fisherman said, China. Di ba? Yun ang naging sagot ng fisherman during that press conference, sir. I guess that's not new to someone like you. You knew that the big boats were there, that the Chinese
Yeah,
Coast Guard are there.
Yeah, we know that they have physical control because in our pleading and in our statement before the tribunal when we filed the case, we said China seized Scarborough Shoal. We
Use the word
yeah,
seized.
We use the word seized.
Yeah.
So China seized Scarborough Shoal, which is a fact.
Yeah. Which happened in 2012. Am I correct,
2012,
sir?
yes.
Yeah, after this standoff between.
But of course, that's a physical act. We don't accept that as valid and legal.
Okay. All right. We'll just be taking a short break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Still to come, should the Philippines file another diplomatic protest versus China? Supreme Court Acting Chief Justice Antonio Carpio will still be with us after the break. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, Supreme Court Acting Chief Justice Antonio Carpio. Sir, you were talking about also another alternative aside from the common agreement. Please tell us more about that.
Well, there are many actions we can take. For example, we can come into a sea boundary agreement with Vietnam on our extended continental shelf. The last time the Prime Minister of Vietnam and our President met in Singapore, the Prime Minister of Vietnam said, asked, why don't we sign a boundary agreement outside the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines in the Spratlys? And the President said, we will study it. But if we enter into a sea boundary agreement, and there's nothing controversial about that because the boundary will be the median line, the middle line, we are actually applying the ruling by state practice, because the ruling says that there is no exclusive economic, there is no, those islands in the Spratlys do not generate any exclusive economic zones. Yes. And therefore, we can now have a sea boundary agreement because there are no overlapping exclusive economic zones. And that will apply the ruling by state practice. We can do the same with Malaysia. We can also file an objection before the International Seabed Authority,
okay,
which has issued permits to China to mine the deep seabed. Because China is not complying with the ruling of the tribunal on a creation of UNCLOS, then the International Seabed Authority should not give benefits to China.
Will they be able to do that? That's a possibility?
Well, that's
Sir?
that will be done by voting of the members of the UNCLOS. They will vote whether to suspend the permits of China because China is not complying with the ruling of the tribunal. Because UNCLOS is a package deal. If you ratify UNCLOS, you must accept all the obligations and also together with all of the benefits. You cannot cherry pick. You cannot say, I will accept the benefits, I can mine the deep seabed, but I will not comply with the ruling of the tribunal. You have to accept it in its totality.
So it's as if it's binding to every facet, any decision made by UNCLOS.
Yes, and I think the other members of UNCLOS will support us there.
All right. We were showing a map, Sir, dun sa Scarborough Shoal. Let's bring that in again so at least we have a better understanding. Because from my understanding, sir, parang medyo triangular shape yung reefs, Scarborough rather, sorry. Tama ba yun?
Yes, it's...
Okay. Medyo triangular
Yes.
shape. Is there anything there, sir? I think the nearest among them is it Panganiban to the Philippines, sir?
No,
No, sorry.
Scarborough Shoal is
Sorry,
in the
Scarborough.
north.
Ano ho dyan yung, because I guess would be nearest to us?
Well, Zambales.
Masinloc.
Masinloc is nearest
Yung pa rin, ano?
to Scarborough Shoal.
Okay. And then, sir, the other discussion here is, out of goodwill, we are allowed to fish there. Unlike before, I'm gonna go there, sir, kasi dati hindi po tayo pinapayagan. Out of goodwill. Pero, sir, hindi ho ba the fishermen still can't enter the lagoon?
That's
Is
correct.
what it's called, sir. Is that correct? Tama ho ba yun?
Yes, fishermen, our fishermen have been telling us they are not allowed to enter the lagoon. Now, the tribunal said we can fish in the territorial sea of Scarborough. That's our traditional fishing ground. And that includes the lagoon.
Kasama yun.
Kasama yun. And the lagoon is the one that's rich in fish because that's where the fish breed. If you fish outside, that's not as rich as the fish inside the lagoon.
Yeah.
But I understand that Chinese fishermen are allowed to fish inside the lagoon. That's what our fishermen have been telling us. So
They
there's
bring a small boat. Maliit na boat ata yung na ipapasok nila sa lagoon, sir.
So that's already discrimination. And that's why they're not really complying with the ruling.
Yeah.
They're just giving us a little bit of it. But we have to press because if we don't press, then we will be consenting to what they're doing.
Are they just giving us crumbs, sir?
Right now, they are giving us crumbs.
Okay. Another point, you also had a reaction on this, sir. Secretary Esperon admitted that China supposedly damaged coral reefs and harvested giant clams. And you were saying this is obviously a violation of protecting and preserving the marine environment, sir. So, papaano ho? What can we do?
Well, that's right. Because the way they harvest the giant clams is to destroy the corals. Because the giant clams, including those dead giant clams, are embedded in the corals. The corals grow over them. So they have to destroy the corals to get the giant clams. Because what's expensive is the shell, the taclobo. So the tribunal already ruled that that is a violation of the obligation of China to preserve and protect the marine environment when China failed to prevent its fishermen from harvesting the giant clams, which are endangered species, and by destroying the corals. But we did not ask for damages because at that time we were concentrating on declaring the 9-dash line invalid. But since China is continuing to do it, we should go back to the tribunal
Again.
and demand damages now because that's what was missing in the first arbitration.
Sir, can we, the Philippines, demand damages, or must the Philippines, for example, and Vietnam?
We can do it ourselves. If Vietnam wants to join us, so that would be very nice.
You know, sir, I guess I just want to ask this. Why can't the Philippines and Vietnam just come together?
Well,
Doesn't that make us a little stronger?
well, in fact, the Prime Minister of Vietnam has talked to our president
Yeah.
in Singapore recently and said, why don't we sign a sea boundary agreement in the Spratlys? That would be perfect because that would be applying the ruling by state practice. But our president said we will study it.
All right. We still need to talk about, as I mentioned a while ago, the Spratly Islands and Sandy Cay. We'll be talking about that after the break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Please stay tuned. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. Our guest today, Supreme Court Acting Chief Justice Antonio Carpio. Sir, I'm going to do a rundown. Sandy Cay. All right, Sandy Cay, we'll put that already on the screen. This was once, or still half the time, a sandbar.
Yes.
Okay, so tell us more about this. Is this an area of concern for us?
Yes, Sandy Cay was discussed by the tribunal because Pag-asa, which we control, we possess, is more than 12 nautical miles from Subi Reef. And we wanted to include Subi Reef as part of the territorial sea of Pag-asa. So we said under UNCLOS, we can use a low tide elevation to measure the 12 nautical miles. There is a low tide elevation about 1 to 2 nautical miles from Pag-asa, and there's Sandy Cay, also 1 to 2 nautical miles. So either way, if Pag-asa, if Sandy Cay is used as the baseline, or the other rock there, the low tide elevation,
The one down.
yes, we would that would include Subi Reef as part of our territorial sea. Now the tribunal said Pag-asa is strange because half of the year it's totally submerged, and half of the year it's above water because when the storms arrive, the storms disperse the sand, so the Sandy Cay becomes submerged. But when the storms disappear and because of the action of the waves, the sand build up again and it's now above water. So half of the year it's above water, half of the year it's below. Now, when China dredged Subi Reef, they pulverized the corals, and the pulverized corals, of course, is sand. And part of this sand drifted to Sandy Cay, and Sandy Cay grew as a sandbar, and it's now permanently above water at high tide. It's now an island, because if it's above water at high tide, then it's an island, entitled to a territorial sea of 12 nautical miles. It's capable of ownership. It's territory, it's land.
But it was only recent that it's
Yes.
capable of territory. Okay.
Yes, only recent, only last year. And under international law, if an island emerges from your territorial sea, that island belongs to the state that has sovereignty over the territorial sea. Since Sandy Cay emerged out of the territorial sea of Pag-asa, which we control, which is our territory, then Sandy Cay should belong to the Philippines. But China saw it rising, and we saw it, we were watching also, but China beat us to the draw. The China sent its Coast Guard vessels, its fishing boats, maritime fishing boats, and surrounded it, so we cannot go there anymore. So China now controls Sandy Cay in the same way that China controls Scarborough Shoal. They surround it with their ships.
Yeah.
Now, Sandy Cay now is really land. It is territory. It has a 12 nautical mile territorial sea. And if China can claim it now as their own, then the territorial sea of Pag-asa will be divided. 1/3 of the territorial sea of Pag-asa will go to the territorial sea of Sandy Cay. So we lose a huge area, about 51,000 hectares. That's more than 3 times the size of Quezon City.
That's the consequence of that.
That's the consequence of losing Sandy Cay, because
Right.
that is land, that is territory.
So let's not think that that's insignificant. Once a sandbar, now it's an island, and sorry, who cares about that? May ganun, di ba, sir? We should care.
Yes, it's very important, because if we don't control, if we lose Sandy Cay, we lose 1/3 of the territorial sea of Pag-asa.
Right.
We lose Subi Reef.
Yeah.
And the tribunal said Subi Reef is part of our territorial sea. We lose that because if there are 2 islands near each other, the territorial sea will be the median line.
All right, so still, again, the Spratlys, maybe we're going to have to skip that for now because we also have Woody Island, but of course it's not claimed by the Philippines. It's very near China. So just very quickly, the landing of the bomber planes in Woody Island, is that the cause for concern for someone like
Well, you have to look at the bigger picture here. Woody Island is in the Paracels, of course, but China is saying that under the 9-dash line, they own everything within the 9-dash line, all the islands, water resources, fish, oil, and gas. So if they can now use Woody Island as their strategic air and naval base, especially stationing their strategic bombers, which are nuclear armed, then they are in a position to enforce the 9-dash line as their national boundary. That's why we are worried. That is militarizing the South China Sea already. It's not, we are not claiming Woody Island or the Paracels, but they will use Woody Island to enforce the 9-dash line. And that means we will lose 80% of our exclusive economic zone.
That's why.
That's huge. That's why we have to protest. Now, President Xi Jinping promised to President Obama and to the world that China will not militarize its islands in the South China Sea. It has done that. So we should protest because that will enable China to enforce the 9-dash line as its national boundary. Then we lose 80% of our exclusive economic zone.
But sir, also the Spratly Islands have been militarized.
That's it. That's why we should protest also.
All right. Sir, very quickly, because of your stand on the disputed waters, will this lessen the possible chances of you becoming a Chief Justice?
Well, that's beside the point, because what is more important for the nation is that we preserve our sovereignty and sovereign rights, because if we lose this, we lose that forever.
And that is definitely more important.
Yeah, that's far more important than any position. That's far more important than the presidency. I mean, the president can come and go, but our sovereignty should remain forever with us.
All right. Supreme Court Acting Chief Justice Antonio Carpio, sir, thank you so much for your time. And again, thank you for helping us understand the situation. And thank you for joining us here on The Source. I'm Pinky Webb. You're watching CNN Philippines. Actually,